If you are writing a book, who's the number one person you need to meet? A literary agent. A literary agent. That's the person who can get you a book deal. So today on the Goddess Power Show, I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins, and you get to meet literary agent Samantha Fabian, live from New York City, who's going to tell us all things you need to know about publishing, literary agents, trends in the industry, and why it's so very important to find a literary agent who believes in you through thick, thin, and big stacks of rejection letters. Welcome, Samantha Fabian. How are you?
I'm good, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me today.
I am so excited to talk with you. We met through the Detroit Writing Room because you're part of the New York Writing Room, and I'm a writing coach at the Detroit Writing Room, and you had a program, and it was just spectacular. I learned so much. So, first, Samantha, can you talk about what is a literary agent?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it's kind of hard to put it a succinct way, but ideally, a literary agent is someone who represents writers and works to be their advocate, the expert of the marketplace to help them sell their books to a publisher.
Oh, beautiful. When I explain this to people, I always say you don't go to court without a lawyer, and you don't approach the publishing industry, the big five especially, without an agent, right? Because you serve as that sort of layer to filter to let those acquisition editors know that this is quality work that you're presenting. Is that correct?
Correct. And there's also just a lot that goes into the deal making process, like negotiation terms, like phrasing, contract terms, and all of that that are specific that agents are required to learn
Mhm.
because we have other contracts to compare them against. So going into it without an agent does kind of give you a disadvantage for the negotiation. So I always recommend getting an agent if you can.
Yes, yes. And a lot of the publishers don't accept unsolicited manuscripts, right?
Yes, that's very true. There are editors specifically who don't accept them. So finding an agent who kind of understands and can be an advocate for you, and then also jump across that barrier is really helpful.
I love it. I love it. So you work at Root Literary, which has offices in New York and California, and you also have a very diverse background in that you've worked at multiple agencies, including doing international rights. So you bring to the table a tremendous skill set. So can you talk about how you became a literary agent, including your time at the Columbia Publishing Program?
Yeah, of course. So thank you for saying all of that. Like, I'm so flattered. But yeah. So I went to college like everyone else. I presumably wanted to be a journalist. But while I was there, I'd always had a passion for books. So I really decided towards the end of my senior year that I wanted to pursue that route and see what I could do in publishing, whether it was editorial or production. I didn't know much because the publishing industry, as we all know, is very opaque. So I was told about the Columbia Publishing course, which is essentially kind of a boot camp for 6 weeks where you get to understand the scope of the publishing landscape. So you meet with people who professionals in the career fields, like so for marketing, managing editorial, production, literary agents. And for 6 weeks, you're kind of doing these series of lectures and workshops, and you learn about it in a very hands-on way. That's when I realized I didn't necessarily want to be an editor, but I was fascinated with both foreign rights as well as agenting. And then that kind of led to my internships after that. So I was fortunate enough to intern at Aisha Pandey Literary, which at the time was much smaller than it is now. Then I went on to Writers House, which was probably the biggest agency I've interned at.
Mhm.
Then I worked part time at Chalberg and Sussman. And then most recently, I was at Lordale Literary, which is where I was a foreign rights manager as well as an agent for about 2.5 years. So all of that range really helped me kind of focus in on kind of the books that I wanted to work with, as well as all of the different moving pieces that go into a book from, getting that manuscript in slush to getting it on a shelf. Um,
Mhm.
and I really got to pursue that a little bit more hands-on when I was at LDLA. And then obviously foreign rights, which is a component I don't think a lot of people think about. But I got to work with clients and bestsellers and help them sell their books to other countries like Latvia, Finland, just random miscellaneous countries. And it's a great revenue stream and like a great subright that a lot of people don't think about.
That is so cool. So let's talk about the process, Samantha. You are approached by, or you receive it. Talk about the whole process. Like, how do you acquire a book or represent someone, and what's the whole process from introduction or submission to publication and
Yeah.
beyond?
So for me, since I'm a little bit of a younger, hungrier agent, a lot of my queries come through like submissions or slush. So sometimes like an author or writer will query me and they'll have a query letter, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, just pitching their project to me with some sample pages. Usually I request that. I take whatever time I need to read it, think about if I'm the best agent for it, what if do I have a clear vision for the project itself, and is it something that would fit in the marketplace and I could feel confident advocating for. After we get to that point, if I all of the answers to that are yes, I usually reach out to the author and we get on a phone call and I get to talk to them about all the things I love about their project, some of the things I was hoping to change or revise or strengthen a little bit more. And then they usually have to take the time to make their decision, because usually in some cases there's multiple people who offer, in some cases it's just the one, and you really have to decide if that's the perfect fit for you. And then we kind of move forward. In terms of what happens like after you sign, it's usually kind of the revision process. I'm someone who's super communicative, because I know that especially for new writers who are exploring the traditional landscape for the first time, there's a lot of questions like, how long does this take, what will be expected of me, what is a reasonable time, like turnaround for response time. And so that's a lot of the communication that happens after signing, prepping them for that, revising the manuscript. And then we would take it out on submission, which I try to equate the submission process for agents to the querying process. So it's almost like the writer has found their perfect match when they find an agent, and then they're finding like that person to close the loop with an editor. So someone who just loves the project as much as everybody else on the team and can really push it forward to publication.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So you really have to fall in love with the work, don't you?
Yes.
Like, you read it and you just know it when you see it. Is that right?
It's true. It's kind of hard to like quantify, because sometimes I'm very critical in the way that I look at things. So I'm always like, okay, what about this is something that makes me love it? And it can be different things. Sometimes it's a character who really just you haven't seen it before. Sometimes it's a voice that just like you can't get out of your head. Sometimes it's a project that is unique and feels like it's going to start a new trend. But most of the most common thread in all of them is like this feeling of I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop talking about it. And I already wish it was a book. And that's usually what kind of leads me to be like, oh, I have to hurry up and finish this and get in touch with the author.
Oh, I love it. Okay, then what? Do you sign a contract, or like how does that work?
Yeah, so after, as I mentioned, as after I've read something and fallen in love with it, usually the next step is to reach out to the author. So if we got on a phone call and we really clicked, and this person felt like we were a perfect fit, usually after we hang up on the call, I actually allow them to speak to my clients so that they can ask them questions, so they learn more about my work style from people who worked with me. And
Uh-huh.
then I also share a copy of my agency agreement so that they can review it,
Oh,
take the time to see if there's anything that's like wonky, any language they're not familiar with. And then they can go back to me and say if they have questions, I can answer and clarify as much as I can before they officially sign and we move forward.
I love it. I love it. So I love how on your website it says you have a wish list of
Yeah.
things that you're looking for that you love to represent. Can you talk about what that is? Because every agent has a different wish list.
Yeah, everyone has a different wish list, so I try to be as specific as I can be, because I know that there's like the manuscript wish list website, and then there's like tweets, and it can be a lot of different information in different places. So I try to keep it as concise. My website is probably the best place to find out what I'm looking for.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I represent a range of categories from adult to children's. The youngest I go at this time is middle grade. So in adult, I'm really looking for book club fiction and stories that are kind of on the younger millennial side. I think there's a lot of growing pains when you're in your early 20s, like early 30s, and figuring out who you are. And there's not enough books, I feel like, in that space. So I'm
Yeah.
constantly looking for stories about generational relationships and trauma and reunions and growing apart, growing together. things like that in that space. I also do contemporary romance and rom-coms, which I love so much. So basically, the only rules for romance for me are basically humor, heat, wit, and those are all I really need to really feel like this is the perfect romance for me. I also
Heat and wit. I love it. That's
yeah.
awesome. Okay.
I just want to swoon like from the first page.
Swoon!
I mean, it is a romance. You have to fall in love with it too.
Yes, I love that word swoon. Okay. I love that. That's awesome, Samantha. That is so fun. Okay. Okay. Look at how you light up when you talk about it.
And then I also go into some darker things. I think I definitely span the spectrum. I like really light and fluffy stories, but I also like things that are more serious and a little grittier. So I also represent fantasies. So I love kind of that elaborate world building, fresh characters that we don't always see. I also really love thrillers and mysteries, anything with like dark rituals, buried secrets, murder. I'm like, yes, sign me up. I'm a Criminal Minds and all of the like ID channel documentaries, like those are my bread and butter. So I love them in stories as well.
I love it.
Yeah, and those same interests also trickle down to my children's as well. So I also really right now especially I want more YA rom-coms. They're not nearly as much as I want. I want to see more body positivity and sex positivity in that space as well. Yeah, and then horror, fantasy. I didn't mention horror, but I do like horror that's a little bit more of like the Get Out, Jordan Peele, where it's like a commentary on society.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty much like I actually work on a range, so adult all the way to middle grade. So
oh my gosh. Okay. So let's talk about diversity because the publishing industry has traditionally been very white and leadership male a lot of times. So can you talk about if any progress is being made and what challenges remain?
yeah, so I think this has been a conversation that's long been happening in publishing about how if we want to reach a diverse range of readers, we ourselves have to be a diverse body of people. So I think we've come a long way in the past couple years or so. I wish it was more. I mean, we always want there to be more. And so my hope is that it's a forward progression. I think the most difficult part is that breaking into the industry can be really difficult. It requires a lot of perseverance and a lot of like willingness to speak out. Often in difficult times. But the more that we can kind of stay and like build a community, because there is a very close knit community of people of color in publishing, the longer we can kind of bind together, the more I think we'll move forward and be able to get into those senior positions to exert the change that we really want to see more of.
I love that. That's awesome. That's so important. So, Samantha, what is the best way for an aspiring author? Say they wrote their book, their manuscript is done, ready. What's the best way to find an agent?
That's a really good question. I think the best starting point, which feels really obvious, but it isn't, is to pick up some of your favorite books. Pick up the book that you love and you just like connected with, that made you fall in love with reading, and look at who represented that. Is it someone that works in the space that you also want to write? Like if you write romance, right? You would want to pick up your favorite romance and look who represents them. That's the first person you should start with, and then kind of go through your list. I think it's as easy as going to the acknowledgement section in the back of your book and just seeing who that person is, and then starting there. I usually like to recommend doing that as a preliminary list, and then there's also resources like manuscriptwishlist.com, which offers, you can type in specific keywords so you can find everyone who represents that, both editors who work in that space and agents who represent it. And yeah, I think that's a best way to do it. I feel like starting with a huge list and then whittling it down to who would perfectly fit for you is always the best way to go.
I love that. So I noticed on your website, Root Literary, it says that all the agents have different wish lists and there's just a really diverse range of what they're seeking. So you really have to have that right chemistry with the agent that you connect with. So do you ever go to writers conferences, not during the pandemic, but before that and possibly in the future, where they have like agent appointments you can make to meet writers?
Yeah, so I'm a huge proponent of like the conference circle. I feel like I do them all the time just because I am new and I want to make sure that people have a sense of who I am, have a sense of what I'm looking for, and they can get a sense of if they feel like I would be a perfect fit for their projects.
Mhm.
So, yeah, even in the pandemic, I was doing a lot of similar to this remote panels. But yeah, I still continue to do them. I have a couple more later on this year and then some more in 2022, hopefully. So, I think it's a great way to kind of pull back the curtain because agents are kind of seen as these gatekeepers and it feels really intimidating, but we're just people and we're book nerds just like you, and we
Nerds.
we all just want to find the projects that are perfect for each other. So
Yes, yes. So do you spend hours and hours every day reading?
yeah, pretty much. It's not during the day in the same way that people think. Like probably in the 9 to 5, I'm like doing emails and strategizing for my clients and like planning what the best next move for each individual's next career step.
Mhm.
But then after that, I usually like I have like a reading day, so I usually take Mondays and devote that fully to reading, whether it's a client that I'm working on edits for or it's a manuscript I requested. I try to carve out my Mondays, and then otherwise, like I'll be up at like 9 p.m. reading a manuscript.
Oh my.
Um, yeah, so it's a nonstop. My dad once asked me like, "Oh, are you reading anything?" And I'm like, "When am I not?"
I love that. That's
That's
awesome.
the better
But
question.
yeah, but we love as a writer, as a publisher, we love words, we love sentences, we love books. It's just what we do. It's like our blood, you know? So I love that. Another really interesting thing, Samantha, that I read on your website is that your agency really loves to cultivate careers. It's not like a one-hit wonder. You are career builders. Can you talk about the importance for anybody watching right now who's looking for an agent to find somebody who's in it for the long haul?
Yeah, I think it's really important. Obviously, sometimes when you write that first project, you're like, this is it. This is the book. Like, it's going to be great. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think sometimes, especially when you're getting on phone calls with agents, it's important to ask that question. Is this someone who's committed to just this project? Or are they asking you about what else you're working on and what genre you want to experiment in and where you kind of see your career going in 5 or 6 years?
Mhm.
That's something that I always ask because I want to make sure that I'm not just in love with this project, but I'm in love with like everything else they want to write.
Mhm.
And so it's really important because I think when you find an agent who is kind of thinking of your career longevity, they're being really strategic about it. So they're like, hey, we're going out with your adult project. I know you're working on a project that could be YA, so we can go out with that simultaneously, and then you can have a book coming out for the next every a book coming out every 2 years or so. So just staying really on top of thinking of your career overall, thinking about your brand. Do you write, gritty political thrillers? Is that something that we're going to have to plan for across the board? And just being really intentional. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with agents who just want to work on one project and then kind of reevaluate each year. But I'm someone that if I offer representation, it's because I want to work on the breadth of their career.
I love that. That's awesome. That's so cool. Can you please offer some words of encouragement? Because back when I had a literary agent and I got rejection letters from editors, I was just crushed. And I've also, in the subsequent years, gotten rejection letters or notes from agents saying, gotta pass. So, can you please share some inspiration and encouragement for anybody who's looking for an agent to just keep trying if they get no's over and over?
Yeah, I like it's so disheartening. Like I think that writers are so brave. You create this thing and you almost like put so much of your heart and soul and blood, sweat and tears in it. And then to go out and like wait for public perception to get back to you, that's really, really hard. But I think the most important thing is to remember that publishing is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So you do have to kind of pace yourself, take however long you need. Rejections are hard, but a lot of them are subjective. So sometimes you have to remember when you go to the library, there are millions of books on the shelf. Not every single one is going to be one that you personally like, but that doesn't make it any less valid of a book. So that's kind of how you have to think about it with an agent and an editor is that you have to find someone who doesn't just see it on the shelf, but like sees it as like this is exactly what I've been looking for and exactly what I'm passionate about working on. And everyone deserves to have an advocate or a representative who's super enthusiastic and passionate about them. So knowing that that's the end game should be enough to kind of keep yourself going. Take whatever you have to do for your mental health, but it's a long game and don't give up.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I love that. What about networking with other writers? Do you recommend that?
Yeah, I think writing in itself is very insular. So like you're here with your computer and you're typing, or maybe pen and paper, I don't know. But I think it's always good to find a community where you can, whether it's through like joining different conference organizations, attending, watching videos like these on YouTube about writing. There's a huge growth in like author tube channels where people who are authors talk about their experiences. Any sort of community is always good. The most important thing though is to never compare your journey to anyone else in your writing group, because no two people are the same, so no two journeys will be the same.
I love that. I love that. So, Samantha, what types of trends are happening right now?
Yeah, it's actually really tricky to gauge because of the pandemic lately. My agency is actually taking some time next week to do some retreat style conversations about the trends. I think right now everyone's really looking for that book that like you just sink into, which obviously is hard to describe on a genre basis, but just kind of really compelling and propulsive storytelling. People want like kind of a lighter, more escapist vibe. So anything where like people are finding joy. I've definitely signed more romance this year than I have previously, just because I was like, anything where the biggest problem is a miscommunication, sign me up. That's as much as I think I can.
I love
Yeah, and I think especially there's obviously a hunger for diversity. So diversity in more than just one genre. It doesn't have to just be contemporary. I'm particularly passionate about disabled voices and featuring, working with authors in that space, whether it's in middle grade, it's in fantasy. I think we're at a point now where it's long overdue for the representation. So we're all working hard to double down and fill the gaps that have already been there.
And that includes LGBTQ authors and stories, correct?
Like POC, all marginalized and underrepresented voices. We're just really trying to fill those gaps because it's sad that it's taken this long, but we're really trying to be as proactive about it. And it's not just a trend, it's something that is here to stay.
I love that. That's beautiful. So, do you mostly do fiction, Samantha?
Yes, I do mostly fiction. I've dabbled in some nonfiction, so I do have a client who works in the nonfiction space, but I'm still trying to learn what my taste is in that space before I move forward, because I wouldn't want to sign someone and not feel like I could do right by them.
Okay, so what are some of the biggest mistakes you see in people submitting work to you?
I think the biggest mistake in querying me personally is people sending me things that aren't what I work in, which obviously it's hard to kind of, again, aggregate all the information and make sure you're not missing anything. But I know personally on my website, I have my anti-manuscript wish list, which is a list of things I don't work on, just so that I can be super clear and candid. So people often send me picture books, chapter books, memoirs, graphic novels, and unfortunately, I don't work in those spaces, so I can't really. Is usually like an auto pass because I don't know those spaces well enough to feel like I could represent it.
Okay, okay. What about the craft of writing? Do you work with writers? Maybe you see something that's like a diamond in the rough and you're like, wow, this could be spectacular if I help massage it a little bit or polish it. Do you do that?
Yeah, I've actually signed a couple of clients from a situation where I read the full manuscript. I loved it, but I felt like it needed some massaging, as you said. And then I reached out to them. I got on a phone call with them, talked a little bit about their career goals, how they've built on their craft thus far. And then I gave them my feedback with enough opportunity for them to be like, thanks for sharing your thoughts, but not for me, or fully being on board. I know a lot of people have polarizing opinions about R&Rs, but I think that I like them for the opportunity to test our communication style. So do you respond well to notes that I give you? Do you feel like you're comfortable talking to me and asking me questions? And then that way we can work on a revision. And if we're both happy, then we both sign.
I love that teamwork aspect. That is so, so very, very important. So,
Yeah.
Samantha, what are some other tips you can offer anybody out there who's watching and who's writing a book, wants to get an agent, feels scared, intimidated, overwhelmed, doesn't know if their book is good enough? Any tips you can share?
Yeah, I think again, it's leaning on that community. If you don't already have critique partners and beta readers, find them. They can be really helpful in terms of going over your manuscript and helping you see problems that maybe you're too close to see. Also, querying with a group is, I think, a good experience. Like having a group of friends who are also querying, so you can kind of maybe take those days where you're sitting and talking and being like, this is where I am in my querying journey. It feels disheartening, but at least you have other people to share that with. Um, and then, yeah, just engaging with YouTube, seeing those videos. I know Alexa Dunn makes a lot of amazing AuthorTube videos about her experience getting an agent, tips for querying, and just kind of give yourself as much information as you need to feel empowered, but trust in yourself. You are writing a story, you have a story to tell. Continue to do that, continue to persist. It is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes. And at the end of the marathon, you get a gold medal. So
Exactly.
can you talk about the glory of going through the whole process with an author and they have that finished book in their hand and maybe they're standing in the bookstore and someone's buying it and their autograph. Talk about the glorious experience of this trajectory of publishing and how amazing it is.
Honestly, it you can't put it into words. The best feeling in the world as an agent is like getting that offer and being able to call my client and be like, hey, everything you worked so hard for, like this is it. Like you have attained it. You have a full team now behind you. You've done it. There's no words for it. One of my clients' books, Camille Baker's Have We Met, came out July 1st. So I'm now starting to understand that feeling of like, oh my gosh, there are reviews. Oh my goodness, people are reading and connecting with it. And it's a feeling like no other. I know that whenever, especially with writers, we tend to be super, or creatives, we tend to be very ambitious and we're like, okay, once I get one thing, I want the next thing, I want the next thing. But there's so much beauty in just realizing how hard and how many years you put into a project and then having it in the hands of people. It's definitely worth all of the hard work to get to that point.
Oh my gosh, I just love the way you just said that. That was beautiful. I know as an author, I've written almost 40 books, but my first novels were published by St. Martin's Press. And when I went into Borders Bookstore, which no longer exists, and they were on the new release table in hardcover, I was like, you said it, swooning. I was
Yeah.
swooning because I worked so hard. Oh my gosh, it's the best. It's so worth the perseverance. It's so
Yeah.
worth whatever ups and downs because it is a journey. So, Samantha, how can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter. My website, samanthafabian.com, has links to all of my social media to keep it very clean and simple. I'm a literary agent at Root Literary, so you can also find me on Publishers Marketplace if you want to see like a record of how long I've been agenting. But yeah, you can always reach me. I'm not a gatekeeper. I'm on social media and available for questions, just like
Yeah,
everyone else.
awesome. I will put the link to your website in the description box so anybody who wants to connect with you can do that. So, any parting words, like any vision for the future or words of encouragement you can share?
This year has been really tough. So anyone who has found the time to carve out to write and find joy in the storytelling, like hold on to that. You are already a champion for being able to do that and like keep a coherent thought in your mind because it's been very crazy. So yeah, just keep persevering and all great things ahead. And honestly, we want you to succeed as much as you want to succeed. So
Beautiful, beautiful. Samantha Fabian, your name is so cool. It's like a character in a book, okay?
maybe somebody will write a character after me. I keep hoping.
I love it. I love it. Samantha Fabian, literary agent, Root Literary Agency, New York City. Thank you so very much for joining me here on the Goddess Power Show because we are all about helping women boss up when we share our wisdom to live bigger, better, and bolder. And you sure do that. And you really help so many people today. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you, all of you, for joining us here on the Goddess Power Show, where you got to meet Samantha Fabian, a literary agent. So if you're an aspiring writer, I know you're going to step away from this show tonight armed with a whole lot of information that can help you succeed and become a published author. Meanwhile, please hop over to twosisterswriting.com and order my book, The Bis Tribe, Activating Your Goddess Power by Elizabeth Ann Atkins. That's my new women's empowerment book. Super excited. So please give us a thumbs up, like the video. Please also subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on Twitter at Elizabeth Atkins. And remember, boss up, goddess, you have the power